The culture that we've created at Momentous is definitely not for everybody. We have a really performance-driven culture.
The co-founder and CEO of one of the most established, reputable supplement brands out there. So it's ironic that you've distanced yourself from the football side of things, but when it comes to athletics and human performance, you're kind of on the frontier of it.
When I left the game, I really vacuumed out of it to focus on like what was next in life. I really didn't want football to define me. I wanted to be successful on my own 2 feet.
You're one of the first guests we've had on that has gone through an acquisition and merger.
Merging the two together was one of the most challenging things that I've had and really tested what mattered to me. We kind of put omegas, creatine, and protein into what we call the Momentous 3. Like if you're doing anything else, it's noise if you haven't mastered these.
Welcome. Let's go, baby. This is another episode of the Athletes and Assets podcast. I'm your host, Noah Lack, and I bring on your favorite athletes to chat about entrepreneurship. Today, we're joined by a former NFL center. My guy was a 2-time captain of the USC football team. He got into the financial services industry. He's like, you know what? Like, this is cool, but like, let's try biotech. Got into biotech and realized there's a huge chance to grab the supplement industry by the horns. And now is the co-founder and CEO of Momentous, Jeff Byers, live from Park City, Utah, man. One of my favorite places in the world, man. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Jeff, what we do on here is we skip the small talk, all right? I need you to give me a true or false here, all right? Is it true? Take me back, 2008, Pete Carroll, who was your coach at USC at the time, legendary coach, asked you to educate the football team on the subprime mortgage crisis. Is this true?
It's true.
Why were you chosen to educate the football team on the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis?
I don't know if it was Pete wanted me to educate the guys or more so educate the coaching staff on there. I don't think the guys really cared, to be frank, but the coaching staff definitely did. I was getting my master's in business and, emphasis in finance and the capital markets at the time. And like, obviously when you're in graduate school talking about finance and capital markets versus when the subprime market is imploding and, 2008 is 2008, really interesting time. And yeah, I just had a unique perspective and what was happening and why. Like, I don't necessarily remember what I told everybody, but I definitely regurgitated a bunch of things I learned in school on there. So it was an interesting time when Pete was like walking into a meeting, it was like a Saturday meeting, Friday night meeting before a Saturday game. I was like, hey, Jeff, I want you to talk about the subprime market and what's happening out there. I was like, oh, okay, here we go.
Wait, he pulled you aside, or is it this was before? He didn't call you on the spot. He kind of gave you an evening to prep.
Yeah, I mean, so we I don't know where the SC football team stays on game nights, but we used to stay at the Marriott in downtown LA, and like all the conference rooms are on the second floor, kind of overlooking the main atrium of the hotel, and like, you all kind of go in, and on Saturday or Friday afternoons, evenings, you have like your first team meeting, and it's like you talk about game plan and all of that, and it's like the full team, and like all the guys, you kind of sit around, against the walls, looking through the playbooks, thinking about what are your cues, and just like I was sitting there, and Pete just kind of walked up and said, hey, Jeff, can I talk to you for a sec? And I mean, it was like, meeting starts in 3 minutes type of thing, and just said, hey, I think there's a lot of interest. And I ended up talking to like 4 coaches afterwards, like asking me more questions.
That's funny. Do you think they he asked you to do that because he knew you were in the graduate program, or because the center in football is, probably one of the positions with some of the smartest guys? I don't think people realize.
It had nothing to do with my position. It had everything to do with that I was in grad school. And like, my major was in finance and capital markets.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, yeah. Well, you, after USC, you were with the Broncos, the Panthers, and the Broncos are doing solid right now. But the Panthers, man, they've struggled a little bit, and they've benched Bryce Young recently. And I don't know if you still keep track of the NFL and are still watching the games, but from your position, Jeff, being a center, people don't realize that you are really calling a lot of shots. You're reading the defense. You're incredibly active, and like you can kind of see what the defense is throwing at you. And because of this, I was very curious to get your thoughts on kind of like the if you kept track of it, what's going on with Bryce Young, the Panthers, and like, what's your thought? What could be fixed there?
Do not keep track of it and have no.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. That's someone who's in founder mode right there. That's someone who's
I honestly don't like. I look at the box scores typically on like Monday morning of both college and pro, just like see how things are tracking. But like I do not like. I don't know. I choose to spend my time differently now. I love the game of football. And I'm sure there'll be another time in my life where I get back into being a fan. But I would say like when I left the game, I really vacuumed out of it pretty hard to focus on like what was next in life. And also just, I had, looking back, like I really didn't want football to define me. And so I wanted to like be successful on my own 2 feet and not let like Jeff, the football player, come in. And so I really distanced myself from the game pretty heavily the first, 4 or 5 years post. Yeah. And I just, I got a young family. I got 3 boys, and like on the weekend we just are out like doing stuff and playing, and we live in Park City and like offices are here. But yeah, we don't find ourselves sitting in front of a TV very often when I'm home.
Do you think some of your neighbors realize you're in the NFL that know you? Or like, I'm sure you're not the type of guy to ever lead with that. Like they'd have to find that out probably on the internet.
It definitely gets around. When I first moved in, there was not a thing. But like, my boys have no concept. Like I have a 10, 8, and 6-year-old, and like, cause we don't watch football, and, like they're just like, yeah, like casually, like, my dad played in the NFL, and people are like, what do you mean your dad played in the NFL? They're like, hey, Xander said you played in the NFL. Like, did you really play in the NFL? I was like, yeah. Anyways, it's just like one of those comical things. And my wife was a professional volleyball player over in Europe and like a complete badass in her own right. And it just, like sports are super important to us, but, we don't like talk about just like normal in my household. Like, it's not like they're like, doesn't everybody's dad play? I mean, they're just kind of naive still because we don't watch the game. We don't talk about it a lot. And like, my boys know my friends that play in the NFL, and it's just like they're normal dudes to them.
It's fascinating that you say all this because you're obsessed with human performance. I mean, you are, Momentous, the company that, you're currently the co-founder and CEO of. Momentous is one of the most established, reputable supplement brands out there on the market, man. And you guys have done an incredible job taking the highest quality ingredients to help human performance in the form of different ways. Creatine, gummy supplements, which we'll get into in a bit. So it's ironic that you've distanced yourself from the football side of things, but when it comes to athletics and human performance, you're kind of on the frontier of it.
Yeah. Yeah, just, right, like what, I love the game. Like, we're super close. We work with 32 NFL teams, right, and their staffs and all that. And it's just not, like, I don't know, I watched football as a job, air quote, job. Lucky I had to call it a job, but like we watched a lot of tape, and like, yeah, like I watch the game differently. You're done with it. And it's not that I'm done with it. It's just there was a lot of weekends in the fall that I didn't get to go ride my bike, hike, right? Like, and I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to play. But like, I just right now, I like have different things I want to do, and like my kids also have like Saturday sports is insane. Like we play, it's like 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. is sports in the fall. Like between every sport we play, and just like there's not, I don't know. I love the game. Like I truly love sports and love what they mean and all that, and am involved in as much as I can. My wife is involved in sports in the community, and it's just pro sports, college sports. It's just like we'd rather be involved than a fan, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the supplement industry, Jeff, is really interesting. I first of all, for me, I've always been a guy who loves his protein shakes. Jeff, I have a claim, or I'll have a confession. I still drink Ensure because after I'm done lifting weights or doing something, I want to maintain my weight, so I drink Ensure. Obviously not your typical protein shake as a 26-year-old man, but like I think it tastes really good and it has enough protein that I need. There's obviously there's multivitamins, there's creatine. I don't take creatine, but what kind of, at least before Momentous, what kind of supplements were you taking? Like, and yeah, let's start there. Like, what were you interested in, and what were you taking maybe while you were in the league, when you first got out?
Yeah, I mean, I think what my journey in the NFL was in college sports was very different than most. I got hurt really young in college. So my true freshman year, I was able to start on a national championship team at USC, and I really, really destroyed my hip, and kind of had a, hey, you might not ever play football again moment. And it put me on a really unique trajectory, but it made me think about what life after ball was really quick. And then, like I mentioned, like I was in grad school while I was still playing at USC, and I was taking night classes, right? I was getting my master's in business. Like there weren't other guys, right? Or women athletes like getting their master's. So I was in a group of, right, with like highly successful, young professionals. And I ended up, because of my injuries, so I had 2 hip surgeries after my freshman season, and then I had 2 back surgeries before my third season. So I missed my third season. And I graduated undergrad in 3 and then got into the Marshall School of Business and did my MBA. But I got really close with what I call the performance staff. So the PTs, the strength coaches, the dietitians, the docs, all of that. Like those were the people I engaged with.
Heroes,
even more than my team, right? Like because I was a 6-year senior at USC because of my 2 medical hardship years, and like when you're 24 going to grad school, right? It's a very different. I have a very different mentality than the 18-year-old freshman playing at USC.
No, you're not hanging out with the 5-star DBs that are coming in.
It's just
it was just a
different thing. So I gravitated towards, the performance staffs, and realistically, they are what inspired or maybe stoked the fire in this passion around optimization and performance, and more so of like, how do I perform for life and take care of myself? There's a couple people that were really influential. John Meyer was a guy at USC that now does a lot of work in pro basketball and pro hockey, that really had a pretty big influence on me. And then went and played in the NFL. And I have a couple great friends that were players, but realistically, like I might talk to my former strength coach more than I talk to any of the
teammates.
And it's just like, that's, like to stay in the game, and their mentality and the things that I were reading and thinking about was much more similar to, right, the staffs than it was actually the players, which is just a unique, like I just had a different career than most and who I associated with. But that really got me passionate, I would say, about, performance for life, optimization, and like asking questions of, why do you do this? What about this? How about that? And I was broken. I had to figure out, like, how do I play? And it's like, I remember keeping track of sleep, when I was playing the NFL. And this was before people
before the 8 sleep era, you were keeping
before
track
sleep
of
was
your
cool,
sleep.
right? Like sleep was not cool in 2010 to 2014, right? When I was playing, and it was
make sleep cool again.
Yeah, like Aura, Whoop, all these things made sleep cool, in the last 10 years, but not when I was playing. But like, I tracked my sleep. Like it was super important, right? Bed at the same time, wake at the same time, because I noticed my performance and how I was able to recover on that. So anyways, I got really deep into it. I've always been like a sports nutrition kind of supplement human. And I think a lot of people are that kind of come from my background and offensive linemen. We're always like trying to optimize and be smarter and do the right things, but it was never something I thought I was going to go be a founder of or run a supplement company. Like, actually we fought it for a really long time, like turning the underlying business into a supplement company was not something I wanted.
Yeah.
Right. And
And
mainly
you're
because,
referring to Amp Human, right? Because
yeah,
that's what
so
you ran
the
before you
company
merged
that,
with Momentous.
yeah, the company underlying entity is called Amp Human. It's the company I founded, and we acquired the brand Momentous in 2020, in 2021. And it was just been, like we needed to figure out product expansion. How do we leverage our access and our uniqueness in a different way? But it was, I had a board that said, "Hey, you should go into supplements." I was like, "No." Right? Like the category is really messy, right? It doesn't have trust or transparency in lots of aspects of it, and people don't understand what it is. Massive category, but it was never something that I wanted to associate with. And the company that we founded was basically consumer biotech. We were doing clinical research. We were initially funded by the Department of Defense, working with some of the most elite people in the world, and like building a supplement brand is actually like most people do it, build really good marketing, figure out what the product is on the back end, right? But they're not building something unique or different. They're just,
Sure.
right, building, building a
Branding.
marketing brand company and
Yeah.
using, right, supplements as a product on the back end, which
Sure.
we never want to do. So, kind of from, I go back to my journey in high school, like I was a huge protein and weight gainer, specifically human being. Like I had a really hard time maintaining weight because I was a really high burner and I just was
Same.
incredibly active. Took creatine, kind of throughout all of my years, was something that was pretty much in the staple, and it, helped, keep lean muscle mass and grow lean muscle mass on there.
What's your thoughts on creatine, by the way? I go back and forth. I actually want to get. I was going to ask this later, but since
We,
you brought it up, like that one is like interesting to me because I think for me, I've always looked at creatine as it's always kind of had this like unhealthy reputation among my circles of like doing it before a workout. But what's your thoughts on creatine? I'm curious.
Creatine is one of the three staples that, if when you talk to the experts and dietitians and all of these things, of like three things that majority of every human being should take: creatine, omegas, and protein, right?
Wow.
Creatine is an essential amino acid in our body. It basically, the easiest way to describe it is it helps you convert fuel into energy. And what they found, right, like, and also creatine is one of the most well-studied molecules on the planet now. Like lots and lots of, like, tens of thousands of clinical trials, like safety profiles through the roof, no cross reactivity, really beneficial for lean muscle mass and cognitive performance and cognitive
Wow.
longevity. So, I mean, creatine now has become a staple around cognitive health, not even the muscle aspect of it. And there's
So
some
interesting.
really interesting things around creatine and like neurodegenerative diseases. Because when you think about it, your brain uses more energy than any other aspect of your body on like a per, like from a size perspective. And creatine is prioritized in the brain. And once your creatine is done, right, your brain, like your brain no longer has it. So your body can naturally produce some creatine. But it's really hard to take from food, like really, really hard. And so the stigma from like the 90s of like, this is meathead muscle building, and all of the risk factors have basically been disproved on it. And, like creatine is a staple. It is
Wow.
like foundational nutrition. And, like one of the great things at Momentous is we work with a lot of the best people. And, one of the things I get asked is, what should I take? And that was the question I asked. And when you think about, right, the curation of what Momentous has been able to do is like, let's leverage this. And, we kind of put omegas, creatine, and protein into what we call the Momentous 3, which is like the three foundational items. Like if you're doing anything else, it's noise if you haven't mastered these realistically, because they support short-term performance, right? They help enhance lean muscle mass, and really, really important for cognitive health. And those things are the biggest things for long-term health that you can do from a nutritional supplement perspective. Now, if you don't move and you don't sleep and you don't do any of that, nothing matters. But anyways, so and so when I stopped playing, I stopped taking creatine. To be super
Yeah.
clear, and it hasn't been it's been about 4 years since this creatine has resurfaced, and the people in my network were like traumatic brain injury, creatine, long-term brain health. Like this is a no-brainer on there, and I think the misnomer is like maybe you're thinking of like this giant loading phase of like, hey, you got to take 40 grams of creatine or whatever. You don't do that, right? Like we're talking about 5 grams, like 3 to 10 grams a day, essentially, based upon size of human, is probably the right amount. And so, yeah, really, for me, it's a very important cognitive longevity. And obviously, I hit my head for a living for a while, and I just prioritize that pretty heavily, and the research is very, very strong.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, in case you didn't know, we have an absolute human performance expert on the podcast.
I don't know about that.
That was an incredible deep dive on just one of the couple of things that we'll get into. That was awesome, man. I'm well, first of all, I'm sold. It's amazing that.
So anyway, so I just like creatine. I'm definitely a creatine crusader. Creatine's really inexpensive, right?
Yeah.
It's a basic molecule. It's just massively hard to get from your diet. It's like something like you got to eat like a 96-ounce steak or something like that, right? To get enough creatine.
Interesting.
Like red meat, fish, milk, but it's massive amounts, and able to get it. And it's just a basic amino acid, right?
Yeah.
So anyways.
The creatine evangelist, man. That's nuts. That's really good stuff. And kind of zooming back out, Jeff, I mean, it's amazing how much you know about this, but you didn't even want to go the supplement route. Let's talk about, so Jeff, you're one of the first guests we've had on that has gone through an acquisition and merger, right? You were with AmpHuman, and by 2022, mid-2022, it turned into a Momentous. It was like a straight equity deal to merge AmpHuman with Momentous, the brand. That must have not been easy. I know it's not easy to merge companies.
Yeah. Oh man, the bringing the acquisition of the Momentous brand and merging the two together was one of the most challenging things that I've had, and really tested. Right, I would say tested what mattered to me, and my co-founder, for that matter. We definitely, if we ever buy another company and merge them in, we'll do it very, very different.
What's the most challenging? What's the most challenging part about the acquisition?
I think part of it was the size that we were, made it really hard. The size of both companies, we were both relatively pretty small, right?
How big was AmpHuman?
Right. What's that?
How big was AmpHuman?
We were probably 10 people, and Momentous was 8 or 10 people, and give or take 1 or 2 there, but relatively equal in the people size and close enough from a revenue size. From that perspective, maybe post closing, it was like a 60-40 split in revenue, of AmpHuman to Momentous at the time. But it seems obvious, but it's like bringing two companies together. One culture dies, one culture lives, right? One way lives, one way dies. And blending the two together does not work, because you get people if you try to be both, you are nothing. And that's what we learned. And trying to appease both things rather than do it our way, do it what we believe, set our vision, our values, and just being steadfast in that decision, and also having, the fortitude to be this is what we want to do. Everybody, it's not for everybody, and not everybody, these things are hard, and it's not a matter of, we don't need to retain everybody. We shouldn't have, we tried too hard, and we, listened to too many outside voices. And, we had 2 boards that had, that came from 2 very different backgrounds. That it was a challenge. It took us about a year to put the 2 businesses together. And really, I would say it took us more 9 months to put the business together and realize, oh shit, we gotta lock in here. and we
Yeah.
have to do it our way. And if we're trying to do it both ways combined, it's wrong, right? And that was
This
hard.
feels like to me what you're describing, the acquisition is like you're in a middle school cafe and there's two cliques on each side on two different sides of the cafe, and they don't hate each other, but like they also don't mingle with each other, and all of a sudden the principal makes these two groups sit together and they're like okay, what do we got to do what do we do now?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah, a bit. It's like taking a football team and a soccer team and making them play lacrosse.
oh
Like is
wow.
like how I would
Wow.
put it. It's like, hey, yeah, it's still a sport, and we're still like, but like, hey, we had something very different here and something very different here, and a different approach, different coaching staffs, different philosophies. Oh, now we're playing lacrosse. And it's like, no, like maybe there's two or three football players that can be on that if they buy in. Maybe there's two or three soccer players that can do that if they buy in. But at the end of the day, like it's like we went from like two different teams playing different sports to a new sport, right? And it was really hard because you try to make like you want to make everybody happy. Like young in my career, like you just uh, you kind of have the sense of like, hey, we should make this a place for everybody. But at the end of the day, it's not like it's okay that if this isn't right for people, that they aren't here, right? And as
Sure.
long as you do it out of, is this right for them and for the business? And like just gracefully move on because it's ultimately better for that human. And like kind of do that out of, air quote love, like rather than like trying to fit them into something that long term is not sustainable or they'll be unhappy. And right, the culture that we've created, Momentous, is definitely not for everybody. We see it over and over again. Like we have a really, really right performance driven culture, and like the people that we have on our team that succeed and thrive here are incredibly driven humans, and like they love change, they love fast pace, they love being challenged, right? They love being direct, having a lot of candor, right? Like
Yeah.
and it's just like and in early stage like things like in our stage of business things change, right? Like
Yeah.
you might spend 3 weeks working on a project that was the most important thing, and we might be like, stop, we're not doing that for another year, or stop, this is no longer a priority because we have new information, right? And now we're doing
Absolutely.
X, and that can be very hard on people. And like it's not right, it's not like our stage of business, like early stage, what I was early growth stage business are not for everybody, right? And that's okay, but it's hard. It took a long time to figure that out, I would say, and it took a long time to figure out like moving on from people because they don't fit in the right stage. That's one of the best things you can do as a
Mm.
leader for that human, and that it hurts in the short term, but long term you put them into a better situation. And also like every 6 months this business changes drastically and the needs change and like the talent level changes, and some people can rise really fast and some people can't, and that's also really hard. So the people aspect of it is a challenge, like because you're like we're not cold blooded, like I really care deeply about human beings, and team is what wins. But you also have to curate your team really tightly. And when you don't have the right people, the other people feel it. And I go back to, my sports days and really think about, how a Pete Carroll or a Ron Rivera, it's like they could love you as a human. Like Pete Carroll cut me in Seattle, right? Pete and I are incredibly close. We were close at that time. He didn't
Mm. Wow.
he didn't do it because he didn't like me. He did it because the team did not need me, and I was not good enough to replace somebody else that was on there, right? And it's like in the time it hurt so bad, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
my college coach, I was a two-time captain for him, right? Like is cutting
God,
me.
that's
It's like,
right, man. That's
right? But it's
incredible.
not, but
You
like
play.
that's not like people aren't making decisions because they like you or don't like you. They're making decisions based upon, do you meet the core values, and do you have the ability? Can you actually play to that ability, And can you meet the needs of the team? Is that what the team needs, right? And that's how I think about people here. And my co-founder and I really deeply think like we kind of core values are non-negotiable, right? And then you have like this gets it, wants it capacity to do it. Like, do you get the job and the role? Do you want it, right? And is the capacity? Do you have the capacity to actually do that job?
Yeah,
And not
absolutely.
like capacity. Do you have bandwidth? Like capacity is like do you have the experience? Do you have the skills? Right? Are you able to move fast enough? And we also like put into capacity is like, hey, we have an office in LA and an office in Park City, and like if you can't be here 3 days a week, that's a capacity issue. So like, anyways, like that's how we think about people now, and it's been an evolution, and we've definitely aren't still great at it. We talk about it a lot because teams win championships, right? Like, and if there's a quote I love, like if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together.
Sure.
And I think a lot about that. Like the team, like we went so fast, in 2018, 2019, or even 2020. It's because Erica and I made every decision, right? And we were like and we had like a team of 4 or 5 people. Like you go really fast, right?
Right.
But you actually don't go far. When you think about it, it's like it took us 3 years, to do $3 million in revenue in a year. We do that, double that essentially a month, right? Like
Wow.
it just like it go and like we're going far now. It doesn't feel as fast for me, but
so you've been pulling in 6 million MRR about.
Pretty close, yeah. I mean, we're like that's about our run rate right now.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
One thing that I appreciate you breaking down how dynamic a startup is, and how you have to constantly change the roadmap based on certain things that you're seeing in the market, et cetera. But one thing I think you would agree that you're very firm on, which you touched on a little bit about this earlier, but I'd love to dive into it, Jeff, is you talk about how much bullshit there is in the supplement industry. You don't know what's what. You don't know what supplement's actually doing this for you. And you kind of mentioned that when we think about consumer brands, Jeff, like, yeah, the conversation usually trends towards marketing and branding within consumer brands. And like, that's kind of when I talk to consumer founders, like that's where the conversation goes. What I really appreciate about what you've done with Momentous is going to extremes to make sure the ingredients you're using are the absolute best, and working with the absolute extremes of whether it's the government, the military, professional athletes. That's something that I find very rare in consumer brands. Like it's insane how like you really care about the actual ingredients more so than other consumer founders that I've met.
I thank you. And I think that was the whole reason why I didn't want to be a supplement company, right? And it's literally been like the last year and a half where I've like embraced like, no, I'm a supplement company, but I'm the anti-supplement company. We want to do it better
anti-supplement supplement company.
Like, do it better than it's done before. Like challenge the status quo. Like this industry was built 40 years ago, right? As like this sleepy side weird, granola, earth and crunchy category. And now it's like, this is a cornerstone to health and wellness. And the industry has to grow up because if it wants to have an impact, truly an impact in health and longevity, it can't be living like it did 40 years ago as this sleeper cottage industry, right? Like that's doing that. I mean, it's the only category like you look at food and you look at all these other things in health and, longevity. It's the only category where there's not a lot of transparency. There's not a lot of trust, right? Like the food industry has done, like all these CPG and food has done such a better job around label transparency, cleanliness, right? Like understanding where this is and storytelling. There's still a lot of, right? There's still a lot of brand and marketing that goes into that. And like, yeah, we do a brand and marketing. We have a great brand and a great marketing team now. But fundamentally, our categories is been shopped at And most people like, you buy Ensure. That was made for sick people, right? Right? It's a mass-produced, right, low quality, right, shake, better than nothing. But just like to call you out, that is like going to the store and saying, I'm gonna buy choice beef, which is the lowest grade beef, because I can, right? Rather than I'm gonna buy a prime rib, right? I'm gonna buy a prime cut of beef, right? Like completely different mentality when you think about those types of things. Or it's like,
Jeff,
I'm gonna
what
go
should I get instead of Ensure?
Ensure you should buy a proper whey protein isolate, right, shake, right, or whey protein isolate powder, right? That's something that has high quality whey, right? Not a ton of preservatives in it around that. And you should also like think about what's the food you're eating post workout. Like have an apple and a whey protein shake, right? Like you get your carbs and really high quality whey that is readily absorbable, et cetera. So anyways, like not to go down that rabbit hole, but I did. But like that's what I see.
I needed that, so I appreciate it.
I'll talk about my old man, right? Like my dad has been incredibly successful. My mom and dad have been incredibly successful, right? Like luckily, like money does not dictate how they buy things. But my dad does not think about, right? Has not thought about my industry as you pay for what you get, right? He doesn't buy choice beef. He buys prime beef, right? He's buying, right, the best fruits and vegetables. But he is not, he's like, oh, I just buy the Kirkland brand, omega-3s. And you're like, okay, like what is the dose of those? How much DHA and EPA is in them? Right? It's like, I don't know. I was like, go look. Oh, you got to take 10 of those, 10 servings to equal one serving, right? Where are the fish sourced from, right? Like, what is the fish, right? Like all of these things, whereas like consumers are thinking about this like in other aspects, but the supplement space, they've been driven to like buy low price, and low price does equal low quality. As an example, I'll go back to creatine.
Okay.
There is one non-Chinese manufacturer of creatine monohydrate in the world. One. And I bet they have 2% of the market or less, right? They're based out of Germany. There's no U.S. manufacturing of creatine. Truly, all creatine monohydrate comes from this one facility in Germany or China.
Why is
don't
that?
know that. Nobody's talking about that, right? And it's like you wouldn't go to the store and be like, I'm going to buy Chinese beef ever, right? Because that's not how we shop for things we put in our bodies, because they have different standards than we do. And not saying that the creatine monohydrate there is any different or any worse, but right, like there are different processes to make creatine. But it comes down to a cost thing, right? It's like $2 cheaper a unit, right, to go manufacture or to go get right creatine monohydrate from there. And that happens all over our category, and that's not being discussed with the consumer. Neither that's being discussed with the consumer is, right? Nobody's talking about that there's truly very little certification. So, all these supplements get tested, and it's like 30 to 40% in all these reports of like, oh, they don't contain what they say they do, or they contain a banned substance, or they contain this, right? And third-party certification to me is like the biggest Wild West, because everybody has a little logo that says third-party certified. And then they're like, oh, we'll share our reports with you. It's like, oh, this is a C of A, like it doesn't contain lead, arsenic, right? Like anything like cool. If it contains lead and arsenic, you kill people. Right? Like that's not third-party certified of like, is label claim accurate? Is what you're taking contain 20 grams of protein or 14 grams of protein? Right? Does it contain anything else that it's not supposed to? Right? And I think that's really interesting. But also, right, like the category is just riddled with artificial flavors and artificial sweeteners. And people like fundamentally, if you're most people buying supplements, right, sports nutrition, are doing it for a health reason, right? They're doing it because they believe that this will make them healthier. Why would you they aren't buying their foods based upon that? Like people are avoiding those things. And so I think there's this big, this big chasm that the industry has fallen, right? So there's a lack of trust and transparency, but also the other big thing for me is clarity. You
Right.
go to the store, there's 500 things. What is important and why, right? And because fundamentally, all things in life, if you want to perform, I call perform and longevity, I use interchangeably, right? Performance for life. Like I want to do the things I love for longer, and I want to get better at them, right? Whatever that may be, work, family, husband, working out, training, skiing. And fundamentally, what I learned as a pro athlete, if you don't do everything, you focus on the things that drive the biggest impact. And you do those things over and over and over and over and over and over. And that's what makes people great. That's what makes you perform for a very long time over, right? But that's not how our category has been. It's like, oh, check out this shiny thing. Check out this shiny thing. Do this, right? Like, and when I talk to consumers, they're like, oh man, I got 10 things in my cabinet. And I'm like, why do you have 10? I don't take 10.
Yeah.
I run a company that's in the category. Why? Because it's not sustainable. And actually, like, I don't need those things, right? Like, I need certain things based upon me, right? And if you just are randomly taking a lot of different things, right, you're not going to continue to do it. Like, you're better off just taking omega-3s and nothing else, as long as you take omega-3s for years. Like, if you take omega-3s for a month, it's like, oh man, I went to the gym once this month, I'm good. Check that box. Like, that isn't driving health. And it's just like, well, I didn't eat fast food once this month. Like, that doesn't, like, it is a consistency, right? Bone crushing consistency. And that's where I think the noise in our category is deafening, and consumers don't know what or why or how to look at things. And, the thing that when we ask, like, do you trust the space? The answer is no. Like, most people are like, I use it. I mean, it's essentially a $200 billion category. Our category is $200 billion. You would expect the health of our society to be amazing.
Sure.
And it's not going the right way, right? Like, our society has more chronic disease than it's ever had. It's sicker than it's ever had. It's like less active, like, right? Like health is going this way, supplements are going this way, right? And therefore, like, to me, it's like we're not focusing on the right things. And it's like, this will fix that, and it's like, supplements don't fix anything, right? They're supplemental. You have to do foundational work. And I think, anyways, that's part of the challenge. Like, 300 products for you to choose from, Noah. What the hell are you going to do?
Too much.
It's too much.
That's way too much. Does the supplement industry get regulated by someone like the FDA?
No.
Like, who's kind of, it doesn't. So
there is no regulation. I mean, the real regulation is the FTC, but they don't do anything. Like the FDA, right? So that's like all around marketing claims, and people do sometimes get in trouble. But in the mid 90s, the DSHEA Act, which is the Supplement Act, was basically created. That created the supplement category. Before that, it was just kind of in this gray space, and now we're in a defined gray space. And so you have food, and you have drugs, and you have, right?
The supplements are in a gray area. That's kind of
in the gray space, and right, everything that has a supplement label says, right, these things have not been, whatever the language is, the DSHEA language. These things have not been looked at by the FDA, right? It just doesn't sit there. So you can't make disease claims. So you can't be like, this supplement cures cancer. That's against the law, right? You get in trouble for doing this, for doing that. But like, you can say this helps you gain lean muscle mass. That's totally fine. This is good for heart health. Totally fine, right? Like, those are claims you can make, but they aren't actually like auditing. Do you have 20 grams of protein in your protein powder? Do you have 1.6 grams of omega-3? Like, that's why there are a couple really good third-party certifications that you should look, right? You should always make sure that it's content certified, right? So like, what is on the label is in it, right? By an independent third party. There's some great brands out there. Like, I believe NSF specifically NSF certified for sport, it is the pinnacle of testing. In there, as a perspective, my business spends over 2% of our top line revenue on post-production certification just to actually prove what is in it. That is why we work with 200 pro and college sports teams, because we have the highest certification process that they can trust that, hey, what is in this product is in this product in the right amounts and nothing else, right? That could potentially hurt my athlete or make them test positive. And so it's just
Jeff,
really,
I was going to say that this episode will be released a couple of weeks after the election, but I didn't see the Shea Act on my ballot.
It was passed by Warren Hatch in the mid '90s in out of Utah. Anyways, it's like a really interesting history. It is. I mean, it did a great thing because it removed it out of like the dark shadows, but it also is just like I believe my goal for Momentous is to help pull our industry up and elevate it. I think we're doing the work that we can. Like the more that we can educate around, like ask your company where raw ingredients come from. Why not? Right? Like, hey, absolutely. We have some raws that come out of China, but we do everything we can to source, right, from countries that are reputable and respectable that we can also maintain a supply chain in. That's really, really important. It costs more money. We certify all of our products because it's the right thing to do, right? And if consumers start asking for it because they're educated, other brands will continue to do it and continue to invest in it because there are great brands out there, a lot of great brands. The problem is the market's almost $200 billion. Right. There's not enough. It's huge, right? It's a huge. Massive market, massive market. Like sports nutrition supplement is massive. And so we just need to elevate it, right? And it can't be like, people should be thinking about, if you're taking a supplement and you're using sports nutrition, you care about your health, you care about your performance. Therefore, you should be making wise decisions on where they sourced. Is it actually what I'm getting, right? Like quality of protein matters, right? Like whey protein isolate is the most filtered form of whey protein. Like everything else has less bioavailability, causes more GI issues. Like you just tick down. Like, why wouldn't you, like, if you're buying something to perform, you should buy, right, what has the best chance for you to be your best.
Sure. Jeff, your intensity, your love for making sure you're putting in the right ingredients and the quality, it's helped you guys get a big enough reputation where recently you were able to partner with some incredible people. I know we haven't chatted much about marketing, but talk about partnering with Andrew Huberman. I mean, a guy who's been sort of the consensus sort of leader in the health and human performance space. I mean, we had another founder on here, Jeff, who was on his wait list to get a sponsorship on his podcast. You've worked with Andrew. Can you talk about that experience and what Andrew's meant to Momentous and that partnership?
I would say, like, everybody looks at and sees where we're at today, and they forget, right, that it was we're 6.5 years in the making. Plus, I was at a biotech that we were doing underlying foundational work that funded this business before that. And what I will say is, like, really core to me is what I call being at the forefront of high performance, right? Working with the best, challenging, asking questions, being curious. Like, we never went in and said, this is the right way to do it, or this is what we think. We were trying to just figure out what was right. And it drew us into a lot of unique places early in our business, right? Like I mentioned this, like, we were initially partially funded by the Department of Defense. We won a innovation and research contract around the product that really funded Amp Human called PR Lotion, which, right, a whole nother podcast on. So we were in these really unique places and working with this really unique ecosystem of experts and practitioners that were helping us guide and navigate into some unique places. And staying at the forefront of high performance is the reason why where we're at today, is because that ecosystem of trust has earned more trust and grown this ecosystem of people like Andrew and others, Andy Galpin and and that just expanded out and out as a business, that because we've done things differently than everybody else, we didn't build this like when I got to know Andrew way back when, it was actually before the merger and acquisition of Momentous, before realistically, like before Andrew was Andrew, right? But he was doing some work in special forces, and we had a couple, right, mutual friends, and he was like we're doing it differently, and we're in different places, and really open and curious on how do we do it better. And like the goal was not to build a brand as another supplement company. The goal is to build the next great high performance company, right? That just happens to have we do it through supplements, but like we are trying to change and be a change agent. And by working with all the unique places we do, it's been able to garner a lot of trust, investing in clinical research, doing advocacy work on Capitol Hill. Like that has endeared us in a unique way to people and has de-risked a category for them that has been very risky in the past, right? To say, this is, right, there's a lot of ducks here, this is the goose, right? Like, I want to work with the one that's doing it differently, right? And yeah, I mean,
I'm curious, Jeff, how many times have you sat down with Andrew Huberman and chatted for hours about the molecular benefits of creatine?
I mean,
I feel like you guys could nerd out for a while.
Andrew, about the molecular benefits of creatine. There are other people, what I love about Andrew, and I think you get from his podcast, is Andrew, I mean, he's smart, like incredibly smart, but he's incredibly curious, and he's learning from a lot of other people, right?
Yeah.
And like his guests that are on, and he's well read on that, right? So I've been fortunate enough, to call Andrew a friend, essentially, right? And been able to talk to him about products, about like my middle boy had a really bad traumatic brain injury skiing a couple of years ago, and was able to call Andrew and ask him like what he thought, and like who should I talk to, and what things should we do around that. Like I'm just very fortunate to have that, and Andrew's made a ton of great introductions for me in the business that have just like really enriched my life and the businesses. And so, I mean, Andrew's way smarter than me. Like just that's not surprising.
No, for sure.
Tenured professor at Stanford. Like I'm not. I'm a has-been offensive lineman. But what I will say, the great thing that I've been able to do is at the center of this high performance ecosystem, right? I've been able to help curate, and like my curiosity is like, what is Dr. Huberman saying? What is Stacy Sims saying? What is Andy Galpin saying? What is the dietitian for this pro team saying? What is navigate the mirror to kind of be at this, because they all have their own areas. And it's like, how do you curate and bring it tighter and tighter, rather than let's be everything to everybody? Let's have the most important things and talk about what matters versus, like one shot here. Because Momentous, right? We aren't the expert at high performance. We aren't. We're a leader in high performance. Therefore, we are leveraging the experts in high performance to become the leader. Right? Like it's a different approach. Like I'm not like what my creatine regurgitation was learning from very smart people, right? Like a Dr. Huberman, like Andy Galpin, like a Stacy Sims, like that, right? Can break it down to me. I'm like, oh man, this is really interesting. Consumers aren't thinking about these things in the right way.
Sure. Jeff, Jeff, we bring a lot of NFL guys on the podcast because a lot of NFL players are doing stuff entrepreneurially. And, typically guys get asked, what was their welcome to the NFL moment? On this podcast, we ask founders, what was your welcome to entrepreneurship moment? Do you have a moment of a story you could share where you're like, oh, shit, this being an entrepreneur thing is getting real?
Yeah. I was obviously lucky enough to play in the NFL. And I made league minimum essentially every year, which is a crap ton of money still. But I didn't make enough money to never play again. I didn't make enough money to fund my own company, right? I think the old crap moment for me was not taking a salary to make sure the rest of the team got paid. Right? Like,
wow.
And this was like, all right, like we're cashing a lot of chips here, right? And so what the NFL gave me was the ability to do that because I could have a family and not take a salary for a little bit and not like crazy hurt, right? Like it was like I mean it's just like one of those times like really a fascinating period of like, oh, like this is real, right? And it's like,
Jeff, that's
yeah,
why the hill that I will die on is I tell everyone athletes are more positioned now than ever to be incredible entrepreneurs because you have the chance to come into a business with your own capital. However, you have the lack of ego and the grit to be like, you know what? I need to make sure everyone else is taken care of. I need to elevate my teammates, before I can re-elevate myself. And so what you described there, man, like, league minimum salary, but still had enough to like start the business and then not take a salary to be able to help your teammates out, man. Like that is why I think athletes are like, this is why we do the show.
yeah. I think the other thing, right, is being an entrepreneur. Like you hear these awesome stories of people just like up and to the right always. It's never up and to the right, right? You almost die.
No.
Like we've almost died like 10 times, right? Like, and it's just like, our motto is like, just like as founders, Erica and I, and Erica, right, comes from McKinsey and Company. Like she's a pro from another world, like incredible and like perfect. We're like a perfect pair to run a business because we have such different personalities, but we have like this really strong will to win and never die. And so we like have like this internal like line. It's like be really hard to kill. Like just don't die, right? Like
Be a cockroach.
and, yeah, exactly. And like that is so important because it is like I mean, it's like in football. It's like, ooh, man, it's really hard right now. Or in sports, like there's a lot of times you're like, not, like don't really feeling it. But guess what? You put your hand on the ground and you do it. It's the only
Yep.
way you get to be great and you get to those levels. And the same thing, like it's like I don't know what tomorrow looks like. Not really sure, but we're gonna win today or do our damnedest to do it today because if we have another day, good things will happen. Right? Just give me another day. Give me another day. And you got to fight for it. And it's really hard and it's really challenging. And it's a whole different level, but so similar to sports because the stress in as an elite athlete, like you have so much pressure, right? And you just like, and you have so much commitment to your team. And like,
Yeah.
it's not just you, right? And even if you're an individual athlete, like you have your coach, you have all these people that you are so committed to that you never want to let down, right? Like that's like being an entrepreneur, right? It's like
No, absolutely.
I will fight for this team, and like I don't want to let he or she next to me down, right? Like they depend upon me. Anyways,
No, in light of being a cockroach, never like. What do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned as an entrepreneur? Like, if you can point to one singular thing, for those watching, like, what's the biggest lesson you've learned that you can share to others?
be ready to reinvent yourself every 6 months, right? Like who you are today is not what the business needs tomorrow.
Mm,
Right? And what
wow.
the business needs today is not what the business needs tomorrow. And I think it's to me, it's like, if you aren't curious and don't have an open mindset, like what is making us win today is definitely not going to make us win in 6 months. Right. And
Wow.
how I operate and what I do today is very different and should be very different. Because if not, that means we're not growing. That means we're not right, like doing that. And I think that's really hard for people. It's like you have to reinvent yourself and you have to change and you have to be incredibly curious and you like have some humble pie. Also, like the other thing is like it can be lonely as shit at the top. Right? Like it's a little different than sports, right? Where it's like, like as an athlete, like you're much more of like the GM head coach, right? When you're an entrepreneur, than you are an athlete. You have a bunch of athletes you play for or that play for you.
Yeah.
But you still play the game, but you're playing it on a very different level.
It's amazing. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah.
That's coming from someone of your success to understand that you have to still have to reinvent yourself is a very, very humbling, very, very interesting tidbit there. And I appreciate you sharing, man. So we appreciate your time, Jeff. This has been another great episode of the Athletes and Assets podcast. I've been your host, Noah Lack, bringing on former NFL center Jeff Byers, co-founder and CEO of Momentous. Check out Momentous, livemomentous.com. What do you want? The sleep, the cognitive function. They got all types of categories. And please
buy creatine, omegas, and protein. Skip all the other noise.
Okay. Anything else you want to plug before we get off, Jeff? That's great stuff. But
Momentous.
Fantastic. Awesome, Jeff. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Take care, guys.